the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 77, Marduk, part 1. That was Darkness Breeds Immortality by Marduk from the Those of the Unlight record. I'm Under the Weather, Mark Rudolph.
And I'm Over the Weather, Jason Hundy. And welcome to part 1 of 2 of our dedication to the unholy evil that is Swedish black metal Marduk. And figured Darkness Breeds Immortality is kind of a good starter. Kind of covers some of the basic Marduk themes that you'll hear in the early era, if you will. Yeah. The tremola, melodic, kind of, atmospheric kind of thing that they did on their first 3-4 records. Mm-hmm. And, kind of some stop-start, some blazing speed, which is what kind of Marduk's always been known for. And then also kind of, they have a slow-down part there with a little bit of Bathory riffing in it, if you will. So, but, we've been tossing around Marduk for a while. We felt kind of appropriate since they put out probably their masterpiece.
I mean, I think the last 3 records they put out, Plague Angel, ROM 512, and Wormwood have been absolutely fantastic front to back. So
sure.
And they're kind of on a roll right now.
And we did the Funeral Mist show earlier in the year, and with Mortis. I
think it's Mortis.
Mortis.
That's what I'm guessing, since we got 2 U's.
2 U's, yeah, Mortus. Yeah. And he's, of course, the kind of the new blood injected into Marduk in a way, you know, and then we'll get to that in part 2 and talk about how
some people don't like.
Yeah, he's
like, hey, this is starting to sound like Funeral Mist and not like Marduk. I'm like, well, if you've got a vocalist that unique,
sure.
I think this is all stuff we should talk about in the second show.
But I think one of the things that, you know, to say about Marduk right off the bat is if there's a criticism that's been launched about against Marduk, especially in their you know early career, it's I guess the lack of diversity on some level, and I think that was not what turned me away from Marduk, because I always kind of liked Marduk, but I never really loved Marduk. They were just sort of a band that, you know, if I was lucky, I would pick up most of their new releases, but then if I missed a few, it didn't, like, bother me too much. And,
yeah. I mean, lately they've been one of those bands where you just fill in, they're like, every time we seem to go to a used CD store, we find, like, hey, here's Nightwing, here's Glorification, here's this, here's that. So
yeah, which is nice, because some of those records I didn't have, and so I've been able to fill in parts of the gaps, because Regain Records, which is where they're currently at, has been reissuing a lot of this old stuff, and so I think it's brought the older albums to the limelight a little bit more, and given people, I think, hopefully a second perspective. You know, people like me that may have passed them over at the time now. You know, you said, you know, that was it that you got Dark Endless, or Chris got Dark Endless and you got Those of the Unlight?
It was one of the two, something like that. And basically back in the day, this was before really any of before the whole black metal thing really kicked over, the Norwegian black metal thing that we know about now.
Sure.
So this was more of along the lines of, I mean, it was the same kind of thing with the first Darkthrone record. Like you hear, I can't even think of the name of it right now.
Oh, Soulside Journey?
Soulside Journey, and then you hear Blaze in the Northern Sky, and there's like that huge transition. It's not quite as severe between Dark Endless and Those of the Unlight, but still it's definitely the more, okay, we're definitely straight up black metal now. I mean, look at the original Those of the Unlight, the original Dark Endless cover.
It was pretty
It's like some goofy eyeball with an upside down cross and a bunch of crazy crap on it.
Looked like a Mortis Skull record or something.
Yeah. Or I can't even think of it right now. I was trying to be clever, but cold medication pumping through me, so I'm not on my game.
It's the only way to do these shows is medicate it, my friends. But yeah, you know, and you know, we'll talk about Dark Endless in a moment, because we're gonna open with a Dark Endless tune, and you know, that the early, I think Dark Endless especially suffered from, a lot of people call it poor production. You know, it doesn't have a lot of zing to it,
but not poor production in the sense of, you know, black metal poor production, but just like you can't, nothing's coming through and there's no atmosphere.
Yeah, it's kind of a bland record, you know. And Those of the Unlight and Opus Nocturne kind of start to up the ante, but you know, again, I could probably pull a song from either of those records in a blind taste test, and no one would know the difference. I mean, those records are kind of seamlessly kind of blend into each other a little bit, and that's sort of where Marduk was for, you know, albums 2, 3, and 4, which we'll kind of be focusing on this show. You know, with Heaven Shall Burn, that's another one where, again, if I plucked a song off that and played it blind to you,
the only reason I can tell differently is the drum production on it is very distinct with the Rototom sound.
That's true.
Pretty goofy.
That's true. And at that point, you're moving from Dan Swannell production into Peter Tatgreen, Hypocrisy Abyss studio production.
I think the Tatgreen productions actually was a bad decision for them.
Well, but that was the trend, as we'll talk about when we get there.
Yeah.
I mean, 96, 97.
But I think at least for me, when Marduk starts to get a little bit boring is when it's all the same kind of like sound frequency, and where Legion's vocals bleed into the guitar tones, bleed into everything.
And the drums are just sort of like a
bam, just in your face.
And that's, you know, that has its moments. You know, you talk about how like what Hellhammer does on some of the old Mayhem stuff is pretty powerful, or you know, even what Frost does.
But even with that, you've got you've got slower guitar riffs with blasting drums. If when it's all blasting and you don't have
tremola,
any of
like Slayer riffing, you know, I mean,
distorted
just like
bass, and like the new records where you actually have a variation in tone between all the instruments. That's when I think they're really hitting on all cylinders for me.
Sure, yeah. Well, getting to, I guess, the early era of Marduk, and we should mention too, as we're talking about black metal, just because, hey, why not? But last night we were able to witness the black metal documentary.
Until the Light Takes Us.
Yeah, which we have mixed feelings on. Mark wasn't.
It was interesting.
Very big fan.
I thought it was pointless, to be honest. But
yeah, if you know anything about black metal, like, you know 99.9% of what's in this movie, you know.
And most of the interviews, I've actually seen more interesting ones. Actually, I saw both of those Fenris ones on YouTube before.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the stuff with Varg Vikernes from prison, I believe some of that's been on YouTube. But
and I'll say this, Varg is an asshole, but he's kind of a... you can't take your eyes off him sometimes when he's talking. He's just kind of
charismatic.
Enigmatic.
Yeah, really.
And Frost was pretty... I thought the thing with Frost was pretty interesting. There was some... He's just a different kind of guy.
And he's not usually heard. He's not usually the mouthpiece of Satyricon. So.
Yeah, it's usually sad.
And I mean, Fenris kind of held the whole thing together with his,
he's kind of the central figure in terms of like being down to earth, but also he can kind of have some fun with it. But
no, I think go out and check it out if you're into the scene or whatever.
Sure,
and support people doing independent films on stuff that you actually
that matters, and hopefully this maybe opens up other, especially like this and Headbanger's Journey and Global Metal. At least we're starting to see this stuff kind of happening.
If you're expecting like the black metal version of Headbanger's Journey, it's people like
it's like a performance art piece almost or something, And
it looks at art under the guise of ignorance. I don't know what.
Yeah, and it kind of looks at how black metal has become kind of trendy, and it looks at like how the trend has fallen into the hands of like there's an American director, Harmony Korine. They talk about like his approach to like why he's fascinated by it, and then there's another
that's almost 10 years ago.
I know, and some of the footage is so old and weird. It's I don't know, to me it was a documentary made for the sort of indie kids who find like black metal kind of like trendy and interesting and dangerous.
Well, and it validates having one of those next to whatever, like Guided by Voices record with a Burzum record next to it or something else.
But anyways, so while we're on the topic of black metal, but we're talking Swedish black metal today, and one of the things that's interesting about Marduk, and we were trying to kind of toss this around earlier, is who really kind of gets credit for designing and blending that sort of traditional Swedish Black Death kind of melodic black metal sound. We tossed around Necrophobic in the mix. Clearly,
even Grotesque to some degree had
that's true
elements of it.
And even some of those early vocals by Joachim on these first few records has a Thomas kind of scream over top, kind of feel to it, and so it's really hard to sort of stamp. Give that sort of stamp of approval to Marduk did this first, but they were definitely
a lot of it was all happening at the same time, and everybody's pulling from the same influences. Just a matter of musicianship, I think, and how you're able to translate Bathory, or something to
Bathory or Frost riffs or whatever, So we can concur that they're ahead of Naglfar and ahead of Unanimated and Dawn and right at the same time as Dissection and Necrophobic and some of those other so-called, black metal, death metal,
Black Death, whatever you want to call them,
mixtures, The thing about Marduk is that by the time Opus Nocturne comes in 94, they're going a totally different direction. I mean, in terms of just pure speed, they're really sort of going in
that seemed to be after everything we got fairly popular, then we got symphonic, and then we got just balls out speed. The Dark Funerals, the Marduks.
Dark Funeral is another one that you'd have to throw in the mix, but I think they come a little bit later too, right? 94-ish.
93, 94. But they started out totally different. They were not blazing speed by any means. They were more mid-paced, if anything, for that first record.
Yeah. So, anyways, we were trying to give some historical credence to where do you fit Marduk in the history of black metal, and again, this early stuff has its charm, but it's the song we're gonna sort of start off with next is "Still Fucking Dead" from Dark Endless, and Dread from Edge of Sanity is the vocalist.
Andreas Axelsson. We had, I'll go through the lineup here. Morgan Steinmeier Håkansson on guitar, who's he's the main dude. And then we've got Devo Anderson on guitar.
And he'll show back up. He'll be in the band for a little while. Devo Anderson?
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And then Rickard Kalm on bass and Joachim Gothberg drums and vocals.
Is Kalm B-War? Is that his real name? Or is this a different guy than B-War?
Maybe. This is how he's credited. B-War shows up on those in Light, I think.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. B-War is the bass player for
I would have gone with Beware.
Beware.
B period.
Beware. the thing we can say about Marduk is they were one of the first Swedish black metal bands for sure. They definitely had the look, the imagery, the corpse paint, the blasphemous lyrics, the blasphemous imagery, and those things were all sort of happening. Even if Dark Endless, this first kind of debut full length, is not very. It has its moments, like there's a tune like The Black or Sun Turns Black as Night, which have sort of some black metal speed and a few kind of black metal riffs mixed in, but then they always sort of fall back into Bathory, Frost kind of rehash.
And just a lot of death metal.
Yeah, and mixed in with the fact that Dan Swano he's at least mixing this record. We couldn't find out who gets production
they might have
credit.
Recorded themselves, then he mixed. But even like visually with the album covers from Dark Endless to those in the Unlight, we go to the stark black, white, and red of what we consider black metal.
Although we would be remiss if we failed to mention their first full thing that they did. It wasn't a full album, but the first EP. And I don't know if you remember getting this, you or Chris, the
Fuck Me Jesus EP?
Yeah, the Fuck Me
got
Jesus.
it. I had the t-shirt.
Okay. Oh, there you go. That's one.
I was in high school, though.
One for the family. And that's a pretty notorious, debut, if you will, debut EP.
Well, it has the Exorcist samples and everything in it. And, I mean, the cover is pretty... I mean, that's way before Cradle of Filth even thought about being, having nuns having sex or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And...
a woman bent over, like, having sex with a crucifix.
Yeah, with a nun hat on.
And it's totally... straight black, white, and red, I think. So there's, like, no mistaking what's going on.
Yeah. Now, what was the impact when that came out? I mean, did that, because of the title?
Well, it was on Osmos, a small French label at the time. I mean, it was fairly, like, cultish, along with, like, similar, it was close to the same time Impale Nazarene was coming out.
Okay.
Which was totally different kind of sound. I mean, there's a Finnish black metal, which we didn't see a whole lot coming out of there, but...
Yeah.
No, I think they were kind of instrumental in at least having that more like industrial sonic, quality bringing into the mix. But
I mean, was this pushing the envelope in a whole another way than say what Mayhem and Emperor and Darkthrone were doing?
I think people dismissed it because it was so over the top.
Did it seem sort of like jokey or not jokey?
Well, I mean, most people
carnival,
that were like deeper into the scene, or at least have been around in the scene longer than I had, they didn't seem to have much respect for Marduk. It was more of a novelty.
Yeah, and I could see that. I always thought,
and I think after
kind of novelty,
like when they started doing all their super speed, phase, I think they started just reputation for longevity, and like, well, they're pretty good musicians, but then only in the last couple of years have they got like a whole lot of critical acclaim.
I would say, and I don't want to say this, but there's certain eras of Marduk that are just sort of flat out boring.
Yeah.
I mean, they're competent and there's some decent riffs but
I think I just saw an interview with Morgan where he's talking about all he thinks about all the time when he wakes up in the morning thinks of Marduk. When
it was in that Decibel, that one pager.
There's actually one an audio or a video interview where he's talking on the bus with like some 60-year-old lady in Philly, which is kind of funny. But I think he thinks about it so much, and almost it's a business in some sense. So I think you can lose a little bit of your creativity because you're putting on an album almost. I mean, you're basically putting on an album or an EP every year for 20 years. You might lose a little bit of steam until you inject
until you
new
get
members into the
stuff.
Band.
Yeah, and we'll get to that stuff in part 2. But and I think you'll hear in Still Effing Dead or Still Fucking Dead from when we go to this into those of the Unlight and Wolves, which are the 2 additional tracks we're going to play from the aforementioned Those of the Unlight, which is their second record from '93. You're going to all kind of start to see, I think, more focus, at least with
and
this
more
type of
varied, songwriting and more atmosphere. I think more so than the first.
Oh,
record.
Absolutely. On a tune like Those of the Unlight, it's really kind of the kind of foundation of the ultimate Swedish black metal riff, and the bass is pretty audible in this era. Wolves is slower, kind of grindier. It almost has like a Freezing Moon kind of feel to it. It's got some like kind of eerie Freezing Moon kind of pacing to it, and definitely a melody that's straight out of the Dissection kind of stuff. But I guess one question before we go into break, and it just kind of popped into my head, and we could probably talk about this later, but do you think that the problem is that there was no producer in Sweden that knew how to like capture black metal sound? Like, say, there was in Norway, people understood black metal a little bit more there, whereas, like, Marduk was trying, but they were only going to Swano, and all Swano knew was really sort of death metal.
And I think at this point, too, Marduk seemed like they were more along the lines of band. They had a more musicianship incorporate into it, not doing the whole Burzum Dark Throne like
stripped
lo-fi
down
thing.
grim. Yeah.
And their music doesn't really suit that kind of recording style. It just gets lost and turns to mud, I think.
Yeah.
That could have been one of the big reasons.
I don't know, just kind of something to think about. But anyways, let's get back to some tunage here. We've got Still Fucking Dead from the debut full-length Dark Endless, and then as I mentioned, Those of the Unlight and Wolves from Those of the Unlight. So enjoy.
We just heard Wolves, Those in the Light, and Still Fucking Dead.
Yes, sir.
Had a lot of swearing lately, but that's okay because it's all song titles. It's not us being filth bags, you know.
I know. I mean, if there's one thing out there, it's that we don't want to, I think we especially the Cannibal Corpse show was very challenging in terms of like how do you approach that. You don't want to like breed censorship, and so you just have to sort of take it as it goes. And
the clean tag is something that is it's self-imposed clean tag, so it's not always clean.
Yeah, I mean, we try. We don't want it to sound like two kind of ass clowns. There you go, swearing again. But two guys just sitting around like two kind of debased metalheads who are like, man, effing sweet, man, love. That's not how Mark and I have approached.
If you have to use a swear as a descriptor all the time, that's some once in a while that works. But I mean, go back to like one of my least favorite fanzines, the Sounds of Death. 10 fucking skulls. All right. Like it just seems it just kind of delegitimate.
It's diminutive of the term. Like if you're going to use the F bomb ever so often to be like effing crushing or something. I mean, there's something to be said about using it ever so often because then it truly has kind of.
But you looked at the reviews and it was like everything was like
and that's
F this, F that, F
that's not
whatever.
Right. But we're kind of entering, I guess, stage 2 of Marduk's sound, which is where they really kind of grasp they get rid of some of the Bathory-isms a little bit more, the slowness, and they go more towards the, I don't know. I mean, they're still there, especially in Materialized in Stone, but now they're really trying to like achieve like a new kind of level of blazing speed, with tunes like Untrodden Paths, Infernal Eternal, Black Tormentor of Satan, these tunes that we're going to sort of be getting into. And Opus Nocturne is this is the first Marduk record I ever had, and it's, I mean, I don't know. Do you think
it's their era of awful covers too?
Yeah. Oh man, they were really into the Tolkien stuff, along with kind of just stupid blasphemy kind of looking covers. I mean, this is very cartoonish.
It looks like, I mean, it's all done in like colored pencil. It looked like the back of somebody's folder after they just watched Lord of the Rings movie or read the book or.
Well, and then of course the Heaven Shall Burn when we are gathered. The original cover is like orcs, with a purple background.
See, I think that was part of the problem. Like, okay, if everybody else had corpse painted black and white photo covers, and then we've got these with goblins and stuff.
Yeah,
it's like okay.
I don't know if that's again a product of not coming from the environment of Norway.
Who knows?
I mean, Dissection had not bad. They were great covers from Kristen Wallen, but they certainly weren't like traditional black metal covers.
Oh, not at all. I mean, Somberland's a dude riding a horse-drawn carriage.
Carriage, and then the Rider of Death kind of.
Yeah, I mean that's just kind of classic
type of thing, and they're cool covers. Dissection, at least, but again,
I think Marduk has trumped everybody. At least the last couple bands we mentioned on logos.
Yes,
they've got a pretty classic logo.
That is a pretty awesome. The upside down cross in the middle with the 666s around it. And it's pretty cool. But this one, Chris actually recommended this one to me. I think I borrowed it from him and had it on cassette tape, and so I listened to it a little bit, and then not too long after this, because I didn't get into Marduk till probably 96, so I was kind of late to the game, 95, 96. So Opus Nocturne had already come out. Heaven Shall Burn had come out in 96. And really what kind of got me into Marduk was I had to review Live in Germania, which came out, I think, in 97, which was the Heaven Shall Burn tour. And, I kind of got into like a lot of the old classic songs through that live record. And Marduk's been like notorious for like, is there another black metal band you can even think of that's come close to as many live records as Marduk?
What do they have, 4?
Live in Germania, Infernal Eternal, Warshaw. I swear there's another one.
I think there's another one. It's not an EP.
Yeah, and then all these re-releases that they've been doing on Regain all have live bonus tracks and stuff, which is great. It's cool, but it's like, holy crap, how much of this stuff can you absorb live, especially the blazing fast, like Panzer Division era, where it's just like, what the hell is that song? It sounded like the 5 previous. So yeah, it's kind of so Marduk, they're black metal. They have their own sort of thing going, and for some reason they've felt that the world has wanted live Marduk for many years, and continue to get them out to the fans. So, but Opus Nocturne. late 94, Swano produced. This is the last record with Joachim on vocals. And we're about to...
Actually, it's the last record with him, period. But
yeah, because he was the drummer as well, right? Okay. And so we're about to enter into the Legion era, if you will. What are your...
Famous from Abruptum.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think Heaven Shall Burn, he does a pretty good performance, but after that, his vocals are kind of grating, and not in a... not in a way to compliment the music either. It's grating in a way where it's just like, God, this is just kind of annoying. It's just a barky kind of vocal that doesn't
all
really
very high register with not a lot of diversity going.
Yeah, he doesn't enunciate anything either. For at least on the first on Opus, yeah.
Well, he's not an Opus. You mean Heaven Shall Burn?
On Heaven Shall Burn,
yeah.
That's right. On Heaven Shall Burn, he enunciates a little bit. But once we get into the super speed eras of stuff, up until World Funeral, I think that's the last one.
Yep.
He just slowly gets more and more irritating to me, and it's just monotonous, and he doesn't really add anything to the music. It's not adding another dimension or another layer or anything to it.
And I guess the only other time I liked him besides Heaven Shall Burn, or at least he had any sort of distinction, is the slower side, the second half of Nightwing.
Yeah.
And after that, it's all just, like you said, just the one monotonous sort of sound. And I know there's been controversy because there's some people who are like Legion loyalists, if you will, who are out there who love that era of the La Danse Macabre and some of that, or La Grande.
The Grand Danse Macabre.
Danse Macabre, yeah. World Funeral era, and Panzer Division has its charms, which we'll talk about later, but, it's sort of, again, this resistance to the new sound of Marduk that I think you're getting, and that's why...
that could be.
I mean, Mortus is so unique. I mean, there's not many black metal vocalists that are...
There's not many vocalists, period, that goes over the top as he does on... I mean, he's like the Jeff Buckley of extreme singing.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. But, but anyways, before we get on to Legion era, we have a couple tunes from the Opus Nocturne record. Materialized and Stone, this is sort of a live staple that they constantly play, and this is really the last truly ultimate kind of Bathory ode that you hear out of Marduk. And I don't know if they kind of always keep Bathory in their back pocket because of the fact that Bathory was Swedish, and so they probably grew up with a little bit more Bathory than maybe some of the other Norwegian bands grew up with. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why that's the black metal sound, traditional black metal sound they always go back to. Them and Frost a little bit, but Celtic Frost is what I meant. But Materialized in Stone is sort of a perfect mid-pace Marduk song before they kind of enter their speed era, I guess. Now, you had originally we were going to play a longer tune from this record, from Subterranean Throne Profound. Do you remember that was one that you had kind of wanted to play? Do you remember what you were?
I don't even know if I wrote any notes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Probably don't remember.
I didn't know if there was a specific reason that you were grabbing that song, or if it just
it's probably for diversity, or like it encapsulated probably like everything they did different on that record.
Sure.
Or something, I'm guessing, but.
And then we've got Untrodden Paths, Wolves Part 2, so our first brilliant sequel. And that's got a really cool bass guitar sort of doing some cool like tremolo scale interplay that reminds me of sort of what Dawn did.
Yeah, and even if it is relatively fast when they're playing, but it's still, there's enough variation in it where it's not just like beating you over the head. Because really, after like going through 10 albums, coming up with some playlists
you had
for shows. I mean, and I listen to stuff all the time, but the middle era is just like, oh my God,
it beats you down.
And I guess if it's year after year, if you're just into it for the pure extremity of it, but I listen to this kind of stuff every single day.
Yeah.
And I'd like to have a little bit of variation, because otherwise, what's the point of it being extreme if it's constantly extreme? Like have like some swells where you can recover, and then you get beaten again. Sure. It makes it that much more.
And it's one of the reasons that Mark and I have talked. I mean, we've been in this thing for 20 years. As long as some of these bands have been playing since the late 80s, early 90s and stuff. And we've been into metal in some capacity. I mean, I certainly wasn't listening to black metal in 1989 or anything. I'm not gonna. I was 11, so I don't think I had access to that kind of stuff. But things get boring after a while. Like I'm not really fascinated by what Deicide's doing these days, and they might be great if you're a hardcore Deicide fan, but there are certain bands I think you're Dark Thrones and a few others that like I don't mind the I don't want to say, I don't want to call Dark Throne meat and potatoes, but the simplified, consistent approach that Dark Throne has.
Well, and Dark Throne is raw as all their stuff is. It's still listenable.
It's very catchy. Yeah. And it's not as like obnoxious speed or just obnoxious blast beats and just.
And there's variation in. There's always variation in speed. Dark Throne's never really been a blazing band at all by any means. So.
And I think nowadays, in order to sort of get Markinized fancy, you have to sort of take a different approach to something, like I think of like a band like Obscura. Like tech metal has been boring to me for a long time, but the way that they approached it was with some emotion and some songwriting and things like that. Or
it's not pure technicality.
Tombs, which is a mixture of all kinds of genres. You got to really sort of take what's been a genre convention and sort of shake it up.
But there's those people that are just purely genre fans too, that I just listen to black metal.
Yeah, which I always find strange, but
that's cool. But I don't understand exactly where you're coming from in that, because I have to have variation in everything in my life. If it's all the same thing, it seems kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like
that's more like a teenage mentality that I would have. Like, I can't listen to this music because it's not cool. Screaming or whatever.
Exactly. Or I only watch horror movies. That's it. I don't believe in comedies. Like life is grim. Life is horror, and so
life is pain.
I think that's before, if you're like a hardcore devoted Marduk fan, I don't want us to sort of come across when we sort of do a little bit more condemnation of the middle era. In terms of like, we don't hate it. It's not bad. It's not badly played. It's not badly recorded. It's just
that could have been
it's just sort of uninteresting.
Point, it could be point or something.
Yeah, if Panzer Division or World Funeral is your first Marduk record, you're going to be sentimentally attached to that. But really, for Mark and I would say it's probably this early era, and then certainly the last three records that sort of hold a lot of weight with us. But anyways, we've got Materialized in Stone, and then the aforementioned Untrodden Path, Wolves Part 2, which you could also find this on the Tribute to Euronymous, which, what was that?
Was that Necropolis?
Necropolis put that out, which is actually, in hindsight, pretty cool compilation,
at the time it seemed like it was pandering.
But Thorns and a lot of cool stuff on there. And then our first of two songs from the Heaven Shall Burn record, which we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. And this is one of Mark's favorites, Black Tormentor of Satan. Song for your grandma on the holidays. So enjoy.
Yeah.
That was Black Tormentor of Satan, Untrodden Paths, Wolves, Part 2. And then we opened things up with Materialized in Stone from Opus Nocturne. We're kind of on the topic of Heaven Shall Burn when we are gathered, which is, they put this out in 96. This is their first record where they've moved away from Dan Swano. So that's kind of a big move for them. They've gone to Abyss Studios, as we mentioned before, Peter Tatgreen. And the stuff you were hearing just in that last tune, it's probably some of the most interesting guitar patterns I've heard them do at this point. You know, that breakdown at the 3:15 mark is like pure kind of Naglfar dissection, which
where everything drops out. It's like really like discordant.
I mean, it's very like triumphant and kind of, you know, stuff like that. There's some cool like downtune noodling that we were kind of listening to that Morgan was doing there, where I couldn't tell if it was a bass or not, and you had to point out that I'm pretty sure it was guitar, but yeah, like we're actually having like through all that, you know, the flurry of notes and speed and everything, we actually have something to like grab onto outside of just being, you know, like hanging on and being dragged through it, being pummeled. And the next tune we're going to hear off this is also the name of one of their kind of bigger live records, along with Live in Germania, and it's Infernal Eternal, and very sweeping, blazing, kind of typical Swedish black metal. But what's interesting about this is the Master Disharmony Dimmu Borgir riff that seems to have magically walked off of this Marduk record onto a Dimmu Borgir in Throwing Darkness Triumphant, and it's the last thing they do on this note is different from Dimmu Borgir.
But if you put them side by side, the Dimmu Borgir one's a little bit more focused. This one has a little bit more feeling to it, I think. But it's definitely along the same lines. I can see where it might have came from.
Well, and Tatgreen produced both records. Maybe had some master tapes laying around, and you know, hey, write a song like this. This sounds good, you know. But anyways, Master Disharmony is still a pretty cool Dimmu song, which is kind of an oxymoron these days. There's not a lot of cool Dimmu songs anymore. But so anyways, Heaven Shall Burn. This is sort of the end of an era, if you will. You know, they're sort of promoting the fast, blazing stuff. It seems like is a lot more at the forefront, less of the atmospheric kind of Bathory riffing. And where we're gonna go after Infernal Eternal is into a pair of songs from Nightwing, and this was an album, I'll tell you, I completely overlooked this when this came out back in the day.
Oh, and judging by the cover, it's awful.
Yeah.
The cover's awful.
And this seems to be from the research that Mark and I kind of conducted. Osmos put out in 98, again, another Tatgreen production. This seems to be kind of, you know, viewed as one of the Marduk kind of masterpieces.
Yeah. And we didn't go into any of the...
Well, it's just beginning, right? The
Blood, War, and Death trilogy of Nightwing, Panzer, and Le Grand Danse Macabre.
Yeah, which we'll talk a little bit more in part 2 in terms of what the thematic elements of it were. But you kind of hear it. The album is divided into 2 parts, right? And what's the translation? Dictionnaire Infernal. Do you remember what that means? Which is chapter 1. That's the first half of the record, which is all fast, blazing sort of stuff. Do you remember? Did you find it? Well, while Mark's looking for that, the first chapter is Dictionnaire Infernal, and then chapter 2, the second half of the record, which has Nightwing kind of as the dividing point, the title track, is the Warlord of Wallachia, actually, which is a region of Eastern Europe where, of course, you know, Vlad Dracul came from, and it's actually pretty cool, the second half of the record, in terms of the lyrical content.
Yeah, which is something before that's been kind of like blatant
anti-Christianity and you know, kind of fantasy type sort of stuff, I guess. And this is more like a historical documentation of the sort of the life of Dracula. And it, you know, if you were to read it, it almost reads like a textbook. Some of the lyrics, you know, like you know, he made a treaty with the Turkish, and the Turkish treaty was broken, and I mean, it just sort of goes on. And as a history teacher, it kind of
this also
fills
had
me with joy.
Weird connotations for me with the name Nightwing, since it's you know, it's what Robin became from Batman and Robin.
Teen Titans, you know. But it's an interesting record. If not schizophrenic, you know, and they purposely set the record up to be schizophrenic, whereas the first half is this blazing speed, which is predictive of Marduk's future over the next couple.
Well, even the second half, we've got it slows down for a bit, but you can feel them. They're like, come on, man, we gotta blast this out again.
Yeah. And the 2 tunes we decided, we picked one from the first half of the record, Of Hell's Fire, which is another fan favorite. They play the song live quite a bit. Again, never breathes. Blazing. The only thing that's even memorable is really the ending, you know, Of Hell's Fire. He kind of says it over and over. It's pretty catchy, and you kind of grab onto it. And then from the second half, Dreams of Blood and Iron, it's got, again, that sort of slowed down Celtic Frost, Bathory kind of pacing. It reminded me of a tune that we're going to be playing in part 2 from ROM 512, which is called the Q0 Poser. And kind of doomy, and this is the Dracula kind of stuff. So, and the record also has another tune called Slay the Nazarene, which we don't have time to play, but we should mention is pretty hip because it has a sweet Wicker Man cover. So,
the sample,
the sample,
I think
the
of
Wicker Man
Edward
sample.
Woodward or whoever's doing it.
The Equalizer, who just passed away. So, and Dreams of Blood and Iron also detecting a Amon Amarth vibe. So, let me know what you think. So, enjoy Infernal Eternal of Hell's Fire and Dreams of Blood and Iron. Dreams of Blood and Iron, Of Hell's Fire, and Infernal Eternal. Those last two, of course, from the aforementioned Nightwing. And we're going to be ending things with the first of two songs that we'll be playing from Panzer Division Marduk, which is the next record we'll talk about at the beginning of part 2. So tune in for that, or look for that next week. And it's Baptism by Fire. And we'll talk a lot.
It actually has a catchy vocal line.
It does.
That you remember.
It does.
That was probably the biggest thing of the last era of records is like there's nothing memorable to pull out of it.
Yeah.
At least for my ear.
Yeah,
so.
It was a memorable riff, but nothing like sing-along ear. There's nothing like you could kind of grasp onto. But hopefully you've enjoyed the introduction to Marduk. We're going to dive into it a lot more in part 2. So let us know what you think. Send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com or check us out on the website, requiempodcast.com. And leave us a review on iTunes or something. So, but we got to get out of here. It's we got to go as blazing fast as Baptism by Fire will be going. So, for Marduk Part 1, I'm Jason,
and I'm Mark.
To the beat.